Terran Shaman provides an aggressive spin towards the Shaman archetype. The idea behind the deck is you want to be out-tempoing your opponent, and on turn 4 you'll find the big power play of Backstage Bouncer, because with that big power swing, especially if you use it onto a token, you're able to get an extremely large board against your opponent. In addition, you can use Bloodlust on turn 6 with Thrall's Gift and then Bloodlust, so 6 mana, that then allows you, with the small tokens that you have, to push lethal damage into your opponent. This deck still does have similar options that can come from it by using the Starship package, because you can use Starport, you can use Liftoff and things like that to build a decent sized Starship. The difference between this and the defensive Shaman is that it also runs the tank, the siege tank, which then can deal some face damage to your opponent as well, using the excess damage that comes from it shooting something, and then it got that rest of the damage going face into your opponent. The cards you want to mulligan for in this deck is you want to mulligan for SCV, you want to mulligan for Murloc, you want to mulligan for Starport, Liftoff, and Turbulus. And depending on some matchups, you might want to be keeping Backstage Bouncer as well. But yeah, going into the gameplay, you'll see that I am in turn 3 against my opponent that's playing a Weapon Rogue. Because I have Backstage Bouncer on the board, you'll see that I use my swings first, then I play the Backstage Bouncer on the opposite side of the taunt, just in case they do have some sort of cleave. That obviously is the best sort of way to make sure that it pans out the best that you can. I didn't have space to be able to use... sorry, I wanted to make sure that I did get the Backstage Bouncer on the board as well that's here. They end up using the Heat Wave, which does clear quite a lot of my board once they do all the different swings and then the Eviscerate. But with that sort of big power swing, I do end up obviously keeping quite a lot of minions on the board, while also still applying quite a lot of pressure towards my opponent. The Liftoff is quite a good draw here as well, because it allows me to get an extra minion out. In addition, I also get the taunt on my Cactus, my Murloc cutter, and ultimately I end up just giving up, because with the amount of taunts that you can get, you can obviously push quite a lot into your opponent, and it makes it so especially Weapon Rogues do have a bit of trouble, because Backstage Bouncers are one of the big cards that Weapon Rogues have a lot of difficulty with. So with this mulligan, I do keep the 1 mana Murloc, the Starport, and then I mulligan away the Cactus Cutter. So this turn I'm just going to be playing down the Murloc. It's just applying tempo towards my opponent. Turn 2 will be playing Starport, and more than likely turn 3 is going to be playing Liftoff. Obviously that applies the best pressure towards the opponent and gives the best chance of me winning in the matchup that's for it. They are taking a little bit of time with their turn, so it's just when an opponent does this sort of thing, you need to make sure that you don't tilt, because of the fact that they do hold their whole turn timer. Obviously, as you could see, they pressed the turn timer just as the end of time was about to come up, so it means that they were there, but they were just waiting out their time quite a lot. They end up just attaching a dagger and then swinging into my 2-1. Obviously, that's not ideal for them, especially since it does generate armor for me. This turn I just play down the Liftoff. It gets me extra cards and also gives an extra minion onto the board too. You could have possibly played Gorgon if you wanted to, but in general, using the Liftoff is going to be more powerful, because you potentially could get a decent Starship to be able to go into your opponent as well. Also, drawing the extra 2 cards is quite useful in any matchup, but this matchup it's quite useful too. So they end up dealing 3 damage to me. Luckily, they don't have the quick pick weapon. Something that I do need to watch out for, obviously, in this matchup is making sure that there's Deafen's accounted for, because Deafen can be a problematic card, especially for this deck. If I was playing the defensive Starship Shaman, that would have obviously been a misplay, because of the fact that having the having the Deafin go onto one of the little tokens is definitely not as strong as going on the defense crystal, because the defense crystal ultimately will be the thing that wins you the match. So they end up using prep here, then dubious purchase, so I'm not really too worried. Ideally, it'll hit the Murloc and the Starship piece, and then the second one hopefully will hit the Murloc or the Starship piece, obviously. Then it does keep my Gorgonzormo alive, which is nice, which is ideal for me. Obviously, I can push a little bit of damage coming from that, but it also means that the Starship piece gets put into the pool as well, doing it in that particular way for me. I use the Liftoff here just to be able to get an extra minion down onto the board. I end up using the Starport here as well, so I use Liftoff then the Starport. The Banshees here are quite strong, so if I am able to get them cleared, it will push a lot of damage towards my opponent, especially since rogues don't usually run too many don't run ways of healing, and they generally don't run too many minions as well. So I do still have the 2/1 Banshees in my pool at the moment. I have the Siege Tank obviously as well, but I won't be able to use that this turn. It doesn't, there's not enough mana for that. So I trade my 2/2/1s into the 2 minions onto the board, and then I end up playing down the SCV. I launch the Starship, so it is going to push 15 damage, and then I just play down my delicious cheese to be able to get extra minions onto the board. Unfortunately for me, I did get a little bit punished because those 3-drops are actually really quite poor for 3-drops. The only one that's decent there is the 3/3 that's over there, but the rest are, like the 5/1's not great. Yeah. But since I did have quite a wide board and they didn't have too much health, especially since I was able to get quite a lot of Banshees, it did mean obviously that I was able to push enough damage to get lethal into the opponent. Going into this game, I am playing against the Death Knight, so once again the strategy is quite similar. Your lock-ons are more beneficial at the start of the game rather than the end of the game. I end up just doing a full Mulligan besides from the Gorgonzormo, because it potentially could be a turn 3 play that I might be doing. I do end up getting Liftoff, so that obviously has changed that sort of thing. So turn 1 more than likely, unless I get a 1-drop, is just going to be passing. Turn 2 more than likely will be Liftoff, and turn 3 will be Gorgonzormo. I did draw into an SCV, which was good, so I can use that to trade into my my opponent's Zerglings. Ideally, you want to make sure that you can have the board as clear as possible in this matchup, just because if they do get the Infestor plus Death Corral, it means that they potentially could overwhelm you a little bit too much. I did end up opting to play down the Gorgonzormo just because of the different ways of trading that could happen here, and the Liftoff in general would have been a decent play too, but it means that they're not pushing as much damage face towards me, and I do have a decent setup here anyway. And if I hadn't have done the Gorgonzormo play, I would have been in a pretty bad situation, especially since I just got 2 lock-ons then instead of anything that's relatively useful. They end up playing down their second Hive Queen, so they are getting quite a lot of value coming from it. Unfortunately for me, once again, I didn't get any Missile Pod through the Liftoff that I did. I do just play down the Starport, activate it, just see what it ends up getting. It gets me a 2/1, which is good. And then I end up just using the delicious cheese. No, I just play down my hero power and just pass over to them, so I'm not really applying too much pressure at the moment. Obviously, I do still have the Starship, the 2/1 Starship that's here, which is decent for me. They did just get an Infestor from one of their Hive Queens, which is a little bit of a problem for me, and they are obviously getting extra value coming from the Hive Queens as well. It's important here that I use the Hex just to make sure that those minions aren't going too aggressive into me, because at the moment I don't really have any sort of plays to do. So I just use the Hex onto the Infestor and then lock on into the Hive Queen, just because it then means that I'm a little bit more protected going into next turn. because if they were able to get like a chilling yoke off or something along those lines, it would have been a very difficult situation for me. So they end up using a main league and then a lurker. So it is going to be pushing quite a lot of damage this turn, especially since the lurker is applying a lot of pressure with the 2 extra damage that's coming from each swing of the Zerg minions. I do end up using the second lock-on, so then I can use the Starship. It clears the majority of the board, and then I play down the siege tank. I think. No, I'd use Liftoff, and then I used Delicious Cheese to be able to apply pressure towards my opponent. Obviously, since they don't have access to the spawning pool this turn, it means that I'm in a decent situation to be able to apply some more pressure towards them. And then obviously with this sort of setup that I have here, I have enough damage to be pushing lethal with Bloodlust. They do end up just trading their 1/1 into my minion, and then the Hive Queen, even if it does trade, there's not really any way that they can survive the damage that I'm pushing here. They do use the Infestor that came from their Hive Queen as well, but with the amount of damage, as you can see, I was just counting to make sure that I have enough damage here. And then I end up just using the Thrall's Gift and Bloodlust, which is obviously enough damage to push lethal into my opponent. See, even if sometimes you could potentially just bait them with using the Bloodlust play, because quite often people will concede if they see the Thrall's Gift, because especially with a wide board like that, they might not even count, because I'm not 100% sure if they would have counted the health total that they had and I had. So in this hand here, I do just mulligan the Jim Raynor, because with the hand that I do have the Turbulus, Liftoff, and Starport, which are 3 of the ideal cards to be mulliganing for. I could have potentially kept the Jim Raynor, but it's in general, the cards that you do want to be doing is you want to be applying quite a lot of pressure towards in the early turns. So SCV and Murloc would have been relatively good, obviously, to get through that. They do end up just playing some Zerglings down, so I still don't know if this is going to be Zerg Hunter, or if it's going to be, the Handbuff Hunter. They end up using a bird watching here, which shows that they do have 2 minions that are in their deck. It doesn't end up hitting anything that's here, and then they play down their Snow Flipper Penguins, so they are obviously pushing quite an aggressive deck, and this does show that it is going to be the Handbuff variant. I end up drawing into a pop-up book, which is quite good. I just use it onto the 3/2, and just to make sure that I clear that and have the least damage that's going towards me. Going with if I did it onto the Zergling, it could have done a little bit, but I think it didn't really matter too much. Like it was because since they'd used the bird watching, it showed that they did have a Zergling already in their hand, because they only had the 2 cards that were there. So there was the Snow Flipper Penguin, and then the other one would have been Ranger Gilly, unless they already had that in their hand too. But they definitely, in that sort of situation in turn 2, they would have used the bird watching to get the second Zergling if they could have, the other Zergling if they could have. So I just use my Liftoff on my turn 3. Obviously, it applies the best pressure towards my opponent. I was hoping for a Missile Pod to be able to AoE this board, but unfortunately I don't end up getting that. But with the minions that I do have inside my pool at the moment, it is pretty favourable for me. I end up just using the Turbulus and SCV, which means next turn I can use the AoE if I need to clear my opponent's board. Yeah, it's quite a difficult situation for my opponent in this sort of spot, because even if they were to clear this board, I would be able to clear them back, even if they use like the evolution chamber or things like that, because I do have the double lock on and such to be able to clear quite a lot. They do play down a bunch of their Zerglings, which is going for quite a wide board. They then use the evolution chamber. I do have the 3, the Liberator in my pool at the moment, which is obviously very effective against these sorts of cards that they have here. It clears everything when I put the lock-ons onto everything. So I just launched the Starship, and then I just played the Missile Pod to apply pressure, launching the Starship obviously just to get everything done that I can. I could have saved the second lock-on if I wanted to, but there's not really any major reason to. My opponent's hand was obviously quite weak, you could tell. They end up just playing down the Patchwork Powers and the Huffer. It gets them a Huffer as well, so I just play down the Siege Tank here. I'm hoping that it does hit the 4/4. Unfortunately it doesn't, so I just have to trade into it, but even so, it means that I'm applying quite a lot of pressure towards them. It was because I was hoping to trade the Missile Pod into the 4/2 and keep the Divine Shield, but they end up just conceding because they obviously didn't have any extra draws that they'd be able to do in that particular match. Going into the next game, I am playing against a Hunter. Once again, so quite a lot of Hunters that I have been playing against have been the Handbuff Hunters. In general, you do want to play around the Zerglings that they're going to have as well, because all of the Hunter lists do have Zerglings. So I decided to keep the Missile Pod for this matchup, because if they do play a Zergling down on turn 2 for on their turn 1 for tempo, it means that I will have a relatively decent board going into them. I do just play down the Murlocs on turn 1 to be able to establish a board as well. Even if, they opt to not play their Zergling, even if they do have it, so it means that I'm in a relatively decent position going into that. I play the Trusty Companion onto the Rush minion rather than the Battlecry minion, just in case I do draw Turbulus. If they are pushing damage towards me, it means that I can it means that if they were to take out my 3/4, I still do have what would be the 2/2 if I drew onto the Turbulus. I play down the Cactus Cutter here because it could get me a lock-on. It gets me a pop-up book, which is also fine. It means that I can trade into the 3/5 and then have some taunt minions to defend myself. And then I just send the 1 damage face that I have. Obviously, in this sort of matchup, I am trying to just hold the storm, hold the damage output that they potentially could have. They do use Titanforge traps, so things that I potentially could be worried about is Explosive Trap, or I could potentially also be worried about Ice Trap if they do have the lift off. I did draw onto Turbulus here. I'm just going to use the Missile Pod first just to see what ends up happening from it. It would have been better in that situation to use my to play the Missile Pod after going face rather than before going face. And then I just send the 3 damage taunt to their face as well, because they will have to trade into me anyway. They do end up using the Sharpshooter, which does make it so then they can use their Zergling to go into my face instead. I do have the Turbulus here, which means that I can buff up those minions, which is good for me. It gets an extra 2 damage onto them. And then I end up just sending all my damage face because I am the aggressor at the moment. And if they don't trade, I'm threatening lethal with the Bloodlust anyway, the Bloodlust turn anyway, so they will have to trade into me. Because, they do need to reduce down the board state that I have here, which is the reason why it's was better just to go face in that sort of situation. They do play down the Taunt minion, and then they send an Arcane Shot into one of my Murlocs, so there still is a decent amount of damage that's on my board. I do obviously have the Horn as well, which means that I can defend myself a little bit too. With the Missile Pod, I'm able to trade into my opponent's minions a bit more aggressively, a bit better. It evens up the math a little bit onto the minions, so I can just trade the Turbulus, and then I can just trade into the Zergling. It still puts them down. It puts them down to the 12 health, so with the Horn of Winter, I do have lethal being posed at the moment as well. They use their reserve spot and their Leok, and then they use the Huffer to use charge, but it's still not going to be enough damage that they're posing with that sort of play. They trade into my, I'm not 100% sure why they um, traded into my heal totem. There wasn't really any extra benefit coming from that, really. Um, because even if I had Bloodlust, it would have been lethal anyway. And I just send my damage face into my opponent with the Horn of Winter. With the Horn of the Windlord, and then that obviously ends up being lethal. So yeah, you do obviously get the like they had a relatively aggressive board state, but with the taunts that I had, I was able to apply enough pressure towards them. Lock-ons would have obviously made that game quite a lot easier too. So going into this match, I'm playing against a Death Knight. Going second, what I want to be looking for is I do want to be keeping my one drops. I was thinking about keeping the Trusty Companion just to use it as an extra draw by buffing one of my minions. By having the pop-up book and the backstage bouncer, I am able to apply quite a lot of pressure into my opponent as well. I do draw into a Thrall's Gift, which is going to be useful in future turns for me, because it will mean that I can use the Thrall's Gift plus to Hex an Infestor, or I can use it to Bloodlust into my opponent as well. They do end up having a Miracle Salesman onto the board, which it can trade a little bit into me. They do get their Buccaneer down as well, so I do want to get rid of that just in case they do try and get an Infestor turn onto me. Like I do obviously have the the Hex turn if I need to, but it's preferred that I don't have to use the Hex in this sort of situation. They end up having a Hive Queen, and they just play it down, and then they trade into one of my frogs that I had. I use my 1/1 to trade, use the coin, and then I just get my backstage bouncer onto the board. 4/5s is quite an aggressive board state going into turn 4 for them. And since they didn't have an Infestor last turn, it's quite likely they won't have one this turn as well. They end up using their Baneling Barrage. It gets them some of the Banelings out, which is fine. Like, I'm not really too concerned about that, especially since they haven't had any Infestors. And then I do play down my Trusty Companion here, because Trusty Companion's guaranteed to get me another backstage bouncer, which will be useful going into the next turn. I then also use the hero power, so I do have a play that I need to. It was relatively lucky for me to get the healing totem, because it means that I can heal back the damage that the Baneling did to me. They do just play down their Chilling Baron, which I'm not really too worried about, because with that, it's quite a low tempo card. It means that they aren't really pushing too much with it anyway. I can just send all my damage face here, like the 2/2 is not really doing anything towards me. And then I just play down my extra backstage bouncer and pass over to them. Because they don't have the spawning pool on the board and they haven't used Nidus Worm, there's no chance of them being able to clear all these minions anyway, because they won't be able to have the rush minion or anything like that. They won't be able to. Their Infestors are too small. They can't just use the Baneling plus Chilling Yodeler, so there's not really any particularly strong play that they can do to clear this board here. They do play down their spawning pool, and they use their Infestor to be able to trade into me. Obviously it gets the extra buffs, but I do have the Horn in my hand, or I have Bloodlust in my hand, which is lethal anyway, just sitting on board. They use their Horn of Winter, which allows them to get some extra mana. It's not posing too much of a threat towards me, especially since they don't have any rush or anything like that. And then I do draw onto my Titan, and then I just trade into my opponent, so I just send all the damage face into them, and they just end up conceding there. So yeah, there wasn't really too much they could do. It does also show the power of the backstage bouncers that are here, because with backstage bouncers, especially if it's just on a smaller token, you apply a lot of pressure. because of the fact that they need to essentially kill two Yetis, especially on earlier turns and things like that. So it is quite powerful on those sorts of turns. Going into this game, I do just want a mulligan for the starport of those two particular cards. Yeah, the starport's better. I don't really like keeping the cactus cutter, and lock on is is an awful card to be keeping in any matchup. You want to be getting the lock on through liftoff or cards like that. So I end up playing an SCV and they end up playing an SCV. It's a pretty similar sort of situation. I'm not really worried too much of what I'm not really worried too much of them having an SCV on the board, because obviously you can use your missile pod if you draw into it. You can use your SCV plus missile pod and things like that. So it's relatively easy to clear. Unfortunately for me, I do end up just getting the worst of the starship pieces, the medvac, because it's so easy to clear, especially with a shaman sort of deck. And I do just trade the medvac into their SCV, because with medvac, especially in this deck, you do want to it applies the most pressure and the most tempo that you can through this deck. By getting it out onto the board as early as you can. I do have the 2-1 that's here as well. By using the liftoff, I'm not going to be able to get the activator going for it just yet. So I just have to wait for next turn to get the medvac ready. It potentially was better just getting the starship online that turn, instead of using the liftoff, so I could apply that extra pressure. They do use the missile pod here, which is a bit concerning, because obviously they now only need to get one more missile pod, and then it clears all the medvac minions that I just have acquired. I end up drawing into the thrall, and I use the lightning storm here. It clears their board the best that I possibly could, and then I'm able to just get the starship launched, just to be able to get myself ready into the next turn. Obviously this applies a little bit of pressure towards my opponent too, which is ultimately what I'm looking for. They end up using their Thrall's Gift as well to get their lightning storm, and then they're also able to clear my board back, so ultimately it ends up being a relatively even sort of 2 turns that we just had. I use my missile pod just to clear the 2 0-1s. It means that they can't use a backstage bouncer if they do have it in their deck. And obviously it means that I'm getting another starship piece onto the board as well. They play down their siege tank so they can use it to get some extra damage going into me. I obviously do have a siege tank in my hand as well, which can be relatively strong too. But I do just play down my Murloc, and then I trade and send the other 3 damage face with my weapon. Because I could have used the siege tank, but using your mana most effectively in general is going to be best. Having the most minions on the board as well is going to be best as well in these sorts of situations. They use the coin here, and then they use their pop-up book to be able to get the full clear onto my board. I do have the siege tank, so I use the siege tank first because I'm ultimately looking for it to hit one of the 0-1s. Unfortunately, it doesn't. I then also have the starport, so I use that next just to see what I end up getting, and then I play down the Murloc. Ultimately, I just trade into one of the pop-up books and just pass. I don't really want to take 3 extra damage just to get rid of the frog from the board. They end up using lock-on, which means that they can trade quite easily into this board, and with the missile pod that they had from their starship, they'll be able to clear my board of now 1-1s. Sorry, 1 health minions, except the 1/2/2 that I had. I end up launching my starship here, so I'm hoping that it is one that gets me poisonous, which luckily it does end up doing. If it didn't, I would have been in a significantly worse position, but ultimately it ends up just clearing luckily for me, and they end up conceding there. So I did get relatively lucky in all honesty, in that matchup for that last AoE. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and bye for now.